Today I'm going to tell you a story that will make your blood boil and your heart break at the same time. This is the story of Isabella Martinez, a cleaning lady who risked everything to save a little girl's life, daughter of a millionaire. The rain pounded against the windows of the Hartford mansion as Isabella Martinez pulled her worn coat tighter around her shoulders. She had been cleaning houses in Connecticut for 12 years, but nothing had prepared her for what she was about to discover behind these pristine walls. The job agency had warned her that Mr. Jonathan Hartford was extremely particular about his household staff, especially when it came to caring for his 9-year-old daughter Sophia, who had been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. What they hadn't told her was about the woman who now controlled every aspect of this little girl's life. "You must be the new cleaning lady," said Victoria Ashford, Jonathan's second wife, as she descended the marble staircase with calculated elegance. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a perfect chignon, and her designer outfit screamed money, but there was something cold in her blue eyes that made Isabella's stomach turn. Victoria had married Jonathan 2 years ago, 6 months after Sophia's mother died in a car accident, and she had wasted no time in establishing herself as the lady of the house. The problem was, she saw Sophia not as a stepdaughter to love, but as an obstacle to her perfect new life. "Sophia is having one of her episodes upstairs," Victoria continued, adjusting her pearl earrings dismissively. "The doctors say children with her condition can be very dramatic about their symptoms, so don't let her fool you with all that crying." But Isabella could hear the desperate sobs echoing from the second floor, and every maternal instinct she possessed was screaming that something was wrong. This wasn't the sound of a child being dramatic. This was the sound of genuine distress, pain, and fear all rolled into one heartbreaking cry for help. Victoria grabbed her Hermes purse from the hallway table and headed toward the door, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. "I have a lunch appointment with the ladies from the country club," she announced without looking back. "Make sure the child stays in her room until she calms down, and whatever you do, don't give her any food or medicine without checking with me first. Children like her need very strict routines, or they become completely unmanageable." The way she said, "children like her," made Isabella's blood run cold, as if Sophia was some kind of burden rather than a little girl who needed love and care. The moment the door slammed shut behind Victoria, Isabella dropped her cleaning supplies and rushed up the stairs following the sound of Sophia's cries. What she found when she gently pushed open the bedroom door would haunt her for weeks to come. There, curled up on the floor beside her bed, was a tiny girl with dark curls matted with sweat, her face flushed with fever, clutching her stomach and sobbing as if her heart was breaking. The room was stifling hot. The windows were sealed shut, and there wasn't even a glass of water on the nightstand. "Sweetheart, what's wrong with you?" Isabella whispered as she knelt beside Sophia, her voice gentle but urgent. The little girl's skin was burning hot to the touch, and Isabella could see that her lips were cracked and dry from dehydration. This wasn't just a tantrum or an episode. This was a medical emergency waiting to happen, and Victoria had left this sick child alone and locked in her room like some kind of prisoner. Sophia's eyes were glazed with fever, but she managed to look up at Isabella with a mixture of hope and terror that broke the woman's heart into a million pieces. "Please don't tell Victoria I'm sick," Sophia managed to whisper between her labored breaths. "She gets really angry when I'm not feeling good, and she says Daddy doesn't want to hear about my problems anymore." The words hit Isabella like a physical blow, and she realized that this child had been conditioned to hide her illness, to suffer in silence, rather than ask for the help she desperately needed. How long had Sophia been enduring this kind of treatment? And how had her wealthy father remained completely oblivious to what was happening under his own roof? Isabella helped Sophia into her bed and immediately went to the window, struggling with the locks that had clearly been designed to keep it sealed shut. The room was like a sauna, and the poor child was obviously dehydrated and overheating, which could be deadly for someone with her medical condition. "We need to get some fresh air in here, honey," Isabella said as she finally managed to crack the window open. "And you need water right now, lots of it." She could see the relief flood across Sophia's face as the cool air began to circulate through the stifling room. "Victoria says I drink too much water and that makes me have to use the bathroom too much during the day," Sophia explained weakly. "She locks the bathroom door sometimes when she has important phone calls, and if I have an accident, she makes me clean it up myself and tells me I'm disgusting." Isabella felt a rage building inside her chest that was unlike anything she had ever experienced before, and she had to take several deep breaths to keep from marching downstairs and calling Child Protective Services immediately. Instead, she focused on getting Sophia the immediate care she needed, bringing her cool water and a damp cloth for her forehead, while mentally cataloging every single thing she was witnessing. This wasn't just neglect. This was systematic abuse disguised as discipline. And Isabella knew that she was probably the first adult in months who had actually paid attention to what this little girl was going through. But she also knew that if she moved too quickly or too obviously, Victoria would find a way to get rid of her before she could help Sophia at all. Over the next few days, Isabella began to see the full scope of Victoria's cruelty towards Sophia, and it was far worse than she had initially imagined. Every morning, Victoria would leave detailed instructions about Sophia's routine that seemed designed more to isolate and control the child than to help her manage her medical condition. "Make sure she takes her pills exactly at 10:30, Victoria would say coldly. "And she's only allowed 2 glasses of water before lunch, otherwise she becomes hyperactive and disruptive." But Isabella quickly realized that these weren't doctor's orders. They were Victoria's twisted rules designed to make Sophia's life as miserable as possible. The pills that Victoria insisted Sophia take weren't even the right medication for her autoimmune condition. Isabella had worked for enough families with sick children to recognize the difference between real medicine and what looked suspiciously like adult anxiety medication that could be dangerous for a 9-year-old. When she quietly asked Sophia about her doctors, the little girl looked confused and said she hadn't seen a real doctor in over a year, only the special doctor that Victoria took her to see once a month, who always agreed with everything Victoria said about Sophia's behavior. "That doctor tells Daddy that I'm getting better, but I don't feel better," Sophia confided to Isabella one afternoon while they were organizing her room. "And he always talks to Victoria alone before he talks to me, and then he asks me the same questions she told me to answer." Isabella felt her heart sink as she realized that Victoria had found a corrupt doctor who was willing to lie about Sophia's condition in exchange for the hefty fees that Jonathan Hartford could afford to pay. The worst part was watching how Sophia's spirit was being systematically crushed by Victoria's constant criticism and impossible demands. "Stand up straight, you look sloppy," Victoria would snap when Sophia was clearly exhausted from her medication. "Stop making those faces, you're being dramatic," she would say when Sophia was obviously struggling with pain or nausea. "Your father works very hard to provide for us, and the least you can do is not embarrass him with your behavior." The psychological damage being inflicted on this child was devastating, and Isabella could see Sophia becoming more withdrawn and fearful with each passing day. But Isabella also began to notice something else during those first few days. Whenever Victoria wasn't around, Sophia was actually a bright, curious, and surprisingly resilient little girl who desperately wanted to connect with the adults in her life. She would ask Isabella questions about everything from geography to cooking, and her eyes would light up whenever someone actually listened to her answers. It became clear to Isabella that Sophia wasn't sick in the way Victoria claimed she was. She was being made sick by the toxic environment Victoria had created around her. The turning point came on a Thursday afternoon when Isabella witnessed something that made her realize she couldn't stay silent any longer. Jonathan Hartford had called to say he was coming home early from a business trip, and Victoria immediately went into panic mode, rushing around the house and barking orders at both Isabella and Sophia. "He cannot see her looking like this," Victoria hissed, gesturing at Sophia, who was pale and lethargic from the incorrect medication. "Get her cleaned up and put some makeup on her cheeks so she looks healthy, and if she says anything about feeling sick, there will be consequences." Isabella watched in horror as Victoria applied adult foundation and blush to Sophia's face, essentially creating a mask to hide the evidence of her neglect and abuse. "Now remember what we practiced," Victoria said, gripping Sophia's shoulders tightly enough to leave marks. "Daddy doesn't want to hear about your problems. He wants to see his happy little girl who is grateful for everything he provides for you." The fear in Sophia's eyes was heartbreaking, and Isabella realized that this child had been performing for her father for months, terrified of what Victoria would do to her if she revealed the truth. When Jonathan Hartford walked through the front door, Isabella finally got her first look at the man whose daughter she had been secretly protecting. He was tall and distinguished, with graying hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to being in control, but there was also something tired and distant in his eyes that suggested he had been emotionally checked out for quite some time. "Where's my princess?" he called out, and Isabella could hear genuine affection in his voice, which made the situation even more tragic. "Daddy!" Sophia cried. running to him with an enthusiasm that seemed forced and rehearsed. "I missed you so much, and I've been such a good girl while you were gone." Jonathan hugged his daughter, but Isabella noticed that he held her at arm's length, almost as if he was afraid of getting too close or seeing too much. Victoria hovered nearby with a satisfied smile, clearly pleased that her coaching had worked and that Sophia was successfully hiding her true condition from her father. "Victoria tells me you've been feeling much better lately," Jonathan said, still holding Sophia at a distance. "That's wonderful news, sweetheart. I knew that new treatment plan would help you improve." Isabella felt sick to her stomach as she realized that Jonathan had no idea there was no legitimate treatment plan and that his daughter was actually getting sicker under Victoria's care. But she also saw something else in his face, a flicker of uncertainty that suggested part of him knew something wasn't right, even if he wasn't ready to admit it to himself yet. Block 5, Isabella knew she was taking an enormous risk, but she couldn't stand by and watch Sophia deteriorate any longer. She began leaving subtle evidence where Jonathan might find it, small things that wouldn't immediately point back to her, but might make him start asking questions. She left Sophia's real medical records from before Victoria's arrival tucked inside a book in his study, positioned so they would fall out if he opened it. She also started timing her cleaning of his office for when he was home, hoping he might witness one of Victoria's outbursts or notice the fear in Sophia's eyes. The breakthrough came on a Saturday morning when Jonathan decided to surprise Sophia with breakfast in bed, something he used to do regularly before Victoria convinced him that it would spoil the child. Isabella was cleaning the hallway when she heard him approaching Sophia's room, and she quickly positioned herself where she could observe without being seen. What Jonathan discovered when he quietly opened his daughter's door would change everything, because for the first time in months, he was seeing Sophia when she didn't know he was watching. Sophia was sitting by her window, having removed the makeup Victoria had applied the night before, and her true condition was undeniably visible. Her skin was pale and clammy, her hands were shaking from the effects of the wrong medication, and she was quietly crying while looking at a photo of her deceased mother that she kept hidden under her mattress. "Mommy, I don't know how much longer I can pretend to be okay," she whispered to the photograph. "Victoria says Daddy will send me away if he finds out how sick I really am, but I'm scared I'm going to die if this keeps going." Jonathan stood frozen in the doorway, the breakfast tray trembling in his hands as he finally saw what had been happening to his daughter. This wasn't the healthy, improving child that Victoria had been describing to him. This was a little girl who was clearly suffering from both physical illness and emotional trauma. "Sophia," he said softly, and when she turned around, he could see the terror flash across her face as she realized she had been caught without her mask of forced happiness. "Daddy, I'm sorry," Sophia cried, frantically trying to wipe away her tears and paste a fake smile on her face. "I'm feeling much better now, just like Victoria always tells you. Please don't be angry with me." But Jonathan had finally seen the truth, and there was no going back to the comfortable lies that Victoria had been feeding him. He set down the tray and knelt beside his daughter's bed, really looking at her for the first time in months, and what he saw broke his heart completely. "Sweetheart, you don't have to pretend with me," Jonathan said gently, reaching out to touch Sophia's forehead and immediately feeling the fever that Victoria had been hiding with makeup and lies. "How long have you been feeling this sick, and why didn't anyone tell me?" The question opened a floodgate of truth that had been building up for months, and Sophia began to tell her father everything that had been happening while he was away on his business trips, speaking quickly as if she was afraid she might lose her courage. "Victoria gives me different pills than what Dr. Peterson prescribed, and she says the new ones will make me better, but they make me feel dizzy and sick all the time," Sophia explained, her words tumbling over each other in her desperation to finally be heard. "And she locks me in my room when I don't feel good, and she says you don't want to hear about my problems because you already have enough stress at work." Jonathan felt like someone had punched him in the stomach as he realized how completely he had failed his daughter by trusting Victoria without question. Isabella, who had been listening from the hallway, decided this was the moment to reveal what she knew. She knocked gently on the door and entered when Jonathan called for her to come in, carrying the real medical records she had found and the notebook where she had been documenting Sophia's symptoms and Victoria's behavior. "Mr. Hartford, I think there are some things you need to see," she said quietly, handing him the evidence that would expose Victoria's systematic abuse and manipulation. As Jonathan read through Isabella's careful documentation, his face went through a series of emotions ranging from shock to fury to heartbreak. Here was proof that his daughter had been systematically poisoned with the wrong medication, emotionally abused with threats and isolation, and medically neglected to the point where her actual condition had worsened significantly. "How long has this been going on?" he asked Isabella, though he was almost afraid to hear the answer. "Since about 2 weeks after you married Victoria," Isabella replied honestly. "She's been very careful to hide it from you, and she's convinced Sophia that you'll send her to an institution if you find out how sick she really is. But sir, your daughter isn't just sick, she's being made sicker on purpose, and if this continues much longer, I don't think she's going to survive it." The words hit Jonathan like a freight train, and he realized that the woman he had trusted with his daughter's life had actually been slowly killing her while he remained completely oblivious to the danger. Jonathan's transformation from distant father to fierce protector happened almost instantaneously once he understood the full scope of what had been happening to Sophia. He immediately called Dr. Peterson, Sophia's real physician, who confirmed that the medication Victoria had been giving her was not only wrong for her condition, but potentially dangerous in the doses that had been prescribed by the corrupt doctor Victoria had found. "We need to get her to the hospital immediately to flush those toxins out of her system," Dr. Peterson said when he arrived at the house. "And we need to document everything for the authorities." When Victoria returned from her spa day that afternoon, she walked into a scene that she had never imagined in her worst nightmares. Jonathan was sitting in the living room with 2 police officers, Isabella, Dr. Peterson, and a social worker from Child Protective Services, surrounded by evidence of her abuse that could no longer be denied or explained away. "What's going on here?" she asked, trying to maintain her composure, but Jonathan could see the panic beginning to creep into her eyes as she realized her carefully constructed lies were falling apart. "The question is, what's been going on here for the past 2 years?" Jonathan replied, his voice cold with controlled fury. "While I was working to provide for this family, you've been systematically poisoning my daughter and convincing me she was getting better." Victoria's face went white as she realized that all of her manipulation had been exposed, and she immediately began trying to spin the situation with the same lies she had been using all along. "Jonathan, you're being ridiculous," Victoria said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow and desperate. "Sophia has been doing wonderfully under my care, and if that cleaning woman has been filling your head with lies, then she's obviously trying to cause trouble for reasons of her own." But the police officers had already heard Isabella's testimony and seen the medical evidence, and Victoria's attempts at manipulation were falling on deaf ears. As the handcuffs clicked around Victoria's wrists, she looked at Jonathan with pure hatred and said the words that revealed her true nature. "You'll never find anyone else who will put up with that damaged brat of yours," she spat. "I was doing you a favor by trying to fix her." But Jonathan was no longer listening to Victoria's poison, because he was too busy holding his daughter close and whispering apologies for all the time he had lost and all the pain he had failed to prevent. 3 months later, Sophia was a completely different child. Under proper medical care and surrounded by genuine love, her health had improved dramatically, and the bright, curious personality that Victoria had tried to crush was shining through stronger than ever. Jonathan had restructured his entire life to be more present for his daughter, working from home whenever possible, and making sure that Sophia knew she was the most important thing in his world. Isabella had been promoted from cleaning lady to full-time nanny and companion, becoming the mother figure that Sophia desperately needed. "Daddy, look what I painted today," Sophia called out as Jonathan walked through the front door, no longer needing to hide her feelings or pretend to be someone she wasn't. The painting was of 3 figures holding hands under a bright sun, labeled, "My Real Family," in Sophia's careful handwriting. Jonathan picked up his daughter and spun her around, marveling at how strong and healthy she had become once she was removed from Victoria's toxic influence. Victoria was sentenced to 5 years in prison for child endangerment and fraud, and the corrupt doctor lost his license permanently. But more importantly, Jonathan learned that wealth and success mean nothing if you're not present for the people who matter most, and that sometimes the most important truths come from the most unexpected sources. Isabella's courage in speaking up had saved Sophia's life, and her love had helped heal a family that had been torn apart by manipulation and lies. This story shows us that evil often hides behind a beautiful face and expensive clothes, preying on the innocent, while the people who should protect them are distracted by other priorities. But it also shows us that there are still heroes in this world, Ordinary people who risk everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves. Sometimes the person who saves your life isn't a doctor or a police officer. It's a cleaning lady who cares more about your well-being than her own job security. If this story moved you, please share it with others who need to be reminded that love and courage can overcome even the darkest situations. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because every story we tell might be the one that opens someone's eyes to a truth they need to see. And remember, if you ever witness a child in danger, don't stay silent, because you might be the only voice that child has.